Welcome to the Foundation Series, your deep dive into startup compensation with industry leaders from across the startup world. Join me, Matt McFarlane, a people operations leader turned compensation specialist, as we uncover the strategies and practices driving success in tech startups around the world. Hear insights from heads of people, founders, and experts as we explore how to build robust compensation frameworks that not only fuel growth and retention, but do so in the dynamic startup environment that we all know and love. Let's get into it. Well, Ami, thank you so much for joining me on the Foundation Series. This has been a topic and a discussion that I've been so looking forward to. I know you and I have had the chance to have a few conversations in the lead up to today, and I think I've just been so interested in your journey in not only kind of coming from a, not a traditional compensation background to being sort of headfirst into this space at Immutable and having to kind of make sense of it all and going from 0 to 1, but also Immutable is in this like really fascinating space as a company and as we think about skills and things like that. So genuinely excited that we get to be here today. But before we dive into all of that, I'd love it if you would just take a minute to introduce yourself, your role, a little bit about what you do, and just tell us a bit about Immutable as well for those who aren't familiar with the company.
Absolutely. All right. Also great to be here, Matt. It's really surreal to me. If I looked at Ami 2.5 years ago that I would ever be on a podcast talking about compensation. So having a meta moment on that right now. But yeah, I am currently the head of people at Immutable, a Sydney-based Web3 gaming company. We are, as you said, really in this nascent space. We have built a platform on blockchain for games to be able to launch and for players, because of our blockchain-based platform, actually able to kind of own the assets that games provide and create basically a new kind of economy in gaming where there's more ownership for users and gamers and hopefully therefore more fun as well. So it's definitely an exciting mission and a space that has a ton of gray is not even the right word, white space, some other color for sure.
I mean, tell me a bit about your remit. So it's not just comp, is it? Like you've got much more that you're responsible for. So please, give us the full sort of context of what's going on in a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis.
Absolutely, which is quite hard to predict day by day, hour by hour. There's things that come up. But yeah, comp is one part of the remit, rewards in general. But it's basically, if you look at kind of the full people function outside of talent acquisition. So from learning and leadership development, rewards including benefits, people experience, so like engagement, culture, listening, and as well as the people partner function, and the people operations function.
Yeah, amazing. And listen, tell me a bit about your background. Like I know I've kind of given half the story away with the intro. So, one notable employer prior to Immutable was Canva. Obviously that one needs no introduction, but tell us a bit about your background and kind of, the lead up in your career to joining Immutable.
Yeah, I think I have a very kind of unusual story, but hopefully that's helpful for anyone who also is going to things they've never done before. I think that's kind of the central theme. I started my career in teaching. I worked in education. I did a program in the US called Teach for America, where you kind of throw like young, hungry uni students, or college students is what I say as an American, but I love uni too. You throw them into schools and communities that have been under-resourced, and you basically show up and teach a room full of little ones who obviously have a ton of potential and maybe haven't gotten the attention and resources that they need. So that was really, I think, my formative years of just being like, you see a need and you step in and you solve it. And there's nothing like having your users or customers be right in front of you and be so impressionable. And so I spent a few years teaching. While I was teaching, I got really passionate about what it took to be effective as a school, and realized that so much of like the success of the students in the classroom was due to the teachers being successful. And that's where kind of this idea of like people strategy entered my mind. I didn't really think of it as HR or, people ops or whatever you might call it, but just this idea of like, how do you optimize the people who are out there doing their jobs? And so I decided to go to school. I went to business school. I thought it'd be great to learn about how different companies and organizations have kind of thought about this space before, and got to study with some really great professors who, did things like org behavior and didn't have that many other MBAs knocking on their doors. So I got to kind of steal a lot of attention that way. Got some advice to go and see this out in a company that had been doing it for a while and doing it well. So I joined American Express, which has been around for like 175 years, which to me is like the ultimate like sexy cool company. Like it's that you've been able to stay around and reinvent yourself over time, and stay relevant, and a place with like really best in class kind of people practices and just a real love for that. So as an MBA, I got recruited into a 2-year rotational program, and that even just was telling, like the investment in kind of the people space. But that's actually really funny because when I was in that, we got to have conversations with the CHRO at the time at Amex, and I remember him kind of saying, hey, look, if you want to be in a role like this one day, head of people role, a CHRO role, there's like the 3 areas. There's like the talent area, so like talent management, especially at a scale company. There's compensation, and there's people partnering or HR business partners. And so he's like, you got to at least have 2 out of 3. And I was like, okay, cool. It's going to be people partnering and talent management for sure. Not comp. That'll leave to someone else. So anyway, I did a great rotation there, then came to Australia and joined Canva, a 1.5 years there, going from 1,000 to 3,000. And my remit was around kind of building and launching performance at Canva, which is called Impact at Canva. It's, performance management. How do we help people grow and provide a framework for that, and conversations between managers and employees. And of course, there's a link between, as there are in many places, there's a link between performance and compensation. But that was really the closest I kind of got into compensation. And I think I was actually probably like didn't seize enough of the opportunity to really learn comp and explore that. Because I just kind of had these assumptions of being like, okay, like comp, that's kind of technical. That's not going to be that interesting to me. It's not creative. Yeah. I'll let them do that. Great team. They got it. It wasn't until Immutable reached out, and I'd been eyeing Immutable for a while, so I was really excited to hear from them. And it was a role that had performance as well as comp. And I was like, oh gosh, like I haven't done comp before. Like, I don't know, but I'm interested in this company. Let me just see how it goes. And yeah, now I'm here.
No, you're here. I love that. I love that background. What an experience, and incredible sage advice from the CHR Amex as well. So, yeah. Okay, so you're at Canva. You've kind of been hit up by Immutable. They're talking to you about this. You're like, oh my god, like 50% of this role, I've got this. The other half, bit of a green space for me. What was the landscape like at Immutable in terms of like in particular their compensation practices when you were kind of going through this process?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was impressive to me what a kind of early stage startup had done without having actual comp expertise. At this point, Immutable had hired their first kind of chief people officer who'd been in the company for a couple months before, my role was hired for. And in that time, I think just smart people who had a natural bend to be kind of data driven and first principles thinking had been like, okay, if we're going to set comp and if we're going to give comp people, then it probably makes sense to look at other data, and let's try to pull together data from places. I think it was kind of having this loose set of basically bands, but only for the roles that already existed, and kind of picking up data from other VCs or from the recruitment side. And so there was like basically a sheet that had many, many tabs, and each of those tabs trying to figure out putting together like a cohesive set of compensation bands. But again, this is also without leveling. So it was kind of like, here's the manager, and it's, okay, it's like a 1, 2, 3 on, intensity of management, and it's this type of engineering that they lead. And so it's like very, very, very kind of customized band. Nothing like super specific around obviously locations and levels and data from more than like 1 or 2 sources.
Yeah, okay. So pretty foundational sort of setup, like obviously helping, the company get by. How big was the headcount by the time you had showed up at Immutable?
Gosh, this might need to be a hashtag fact check, but I'd say less than 200, maybe like 160.
Yeah, okay. And you were about to hit a pretty decent growth arc by the sounds of it as well. What was the sort of projected growth, or what did you actually end up doing?
We were projected at that time to basically double in size by the end of the year, and this was in May.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so pretty interesting background. What's, I guess, kicking off from there, what was the mandate? What was the focus from a compensation perspective? What did you come into, and what was your sort of first port of call?
Yeah, so it was basically like we kind of crafted the structure where it was like, hey, look, we're going to have some people partners who are front facing with the business, and then we need someone who's kind of like helping create the programs that are then going to create like stability in the business, and comp obviously being one of them, performance being one of them. We want a high performance culture, we want a highly motivated culture, we want people like these sort of philosophical beliefs, right, that had been like quite natural to the company, about like we want people to feel really rewarded and really valued. We want that to be something that does draw people and does keep people, and recognizes that we're asking people to do a lot and to do different. And so I was basically asked just to build like the initial program around that. And there were some pieces that were clear that we wanted to build, like these ideas of like comp reviews, and these ideas of like a way to more systematically have the right salaries in offers. But then things like, you don't know what you don't know. So there were asks that probably weren't as clear, right? Which is like, how does comp link to performance? What are the factors that we're going to be using to create compensation banding? How deeply data driven do we want to be? How transparent do we want to be? Those were things that maybe weren't like explicitly asked, but it was at least the basics, right? Of having comp reviews, having people have salaries that felt fair.
Yeah, I really love that. And so I guess I've got two questions. One is like, what approach did you take to start, answering some of those questions or taking a position on some of those things? And then I really want to come back to pay for performance, because I think that's such a fascinating space. But, you mentioned transparency, you mentioned, comp reviews, all of these different factors which commonly form your compensation philosophy. Talk us through the process that you took to kind of take a stance on each of those.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the nice thing was like the pairing of both of those kind of facets in the role. And so I used my good friend Google and my other good friend LinkedIn, and tried to like reach out to the network, phone a friend, people who've done it before. How do you do this? Do you use tools?
Love that advice.
What's the process? How long does it take? Like, what should I expect to be hard? And even just simple things like, this is going to sound so elementary, especially to this crowd, but like I heard about Radford for the first time, right? Like here's a gold standard source of data that you should use. And the nice thing about Immutable, I knew from the get-go and before I joined, and it was something that drew me, was like wanting the best of the best in terms of kind of like tooling and resources, and being kind of willing to like invest in that, and not kind of fight for that. So I was like, okay, great. Hearing enough about, kind of Radford from multiple people, hearing about a tool, PAVE, from multiple people. And actually the organization had already done the scoping around PAVE, so I got to join when that was already coming, and it was great because it validated what I was hearing. And then looking just at articles, like how do you build compensation? How do you build a compensation program? What's a part of a compensation program? And then speaking internally, like our people partners who had just joined, being like, hey, what are you hearing in terms of employee needs about compensation? What are like the sticky spots? Like what are the challenges? There's like wondering about, is this fair? I'm hearing, the employees saying like, hey, my friend at this company is getting paid this much. What about me? And so I think that really helped me craft like, okay, what are the first things that we need to do? Okay, we need to figure out what is our process for kind of developing the fundamentals in comp. Okay, hearing that like a lot of compensation has to do with actually your philosophies. And before you start building any part of a process, you need to think about some of these trade-off spaces, right? Like how do you think about how compensation ties to performance? How do you think about how high you want your compensation to be, the lever it is for people? So I think getting all of that, and like I'm one of those people who like dumps things on like a white page, and it might look messy at first, but it's kind of like notes from this, and now we have ChatGPT. 2.5 years ago I don't think it was like quite what it is now, which I use it every single day now, but it was me doing my own kind of synthesis of like, okay, cool, common questions I'm hearing, common things to figure out that I'm hearing people say. And so that's kind of how I built that roadmap.
Nice. Yeah, I really loved, I think in particular, the thing that resonates most with me is like, I love how you use your network. Like I really, really, I think I can't recommend that enough. And I think so many heads of people, so many people in general are really, really shy away from compensation because like, it's a deeply emotive topic. I totally get that. And it's something that touches and affects everybody in the organization. But I think you can't, I can't overstate how important it is just taking steps towards, defining some of the things that you've done. And I love that approach of, just educating yourself. There's so many resources out there. I make a whole heap of resources available, but there's plenty, online.
Yeah.
There's
I wish you'd been around. You might have, but I wish you'd been around 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
A lot of you're
That's
talking
and
about
that's
is
one of the reasons
effective.
why I was so keen to do it. But I think there's also people that have been through it, and and it's great that you were kind of able to lean on that network and use that as a means to helping take steps towards defining your position around stuff. But I think as well, like speaking to your business partners, no doubt you spoke to your people as well. But I think being able to be widely consultative is such a critical part of this because again, this is one of the things that we do as a people team that literally touches everybody. And it's something everyone's got an opinion on. So you kind of got to take a stand on a few things.
Yep.
And yeah, I really like the sound of the approach that you took. We touched on pay for performance. I think this is such an interesting space because no two companies approach this the same. So tell me a bit about what it meant for you and for Immutable in terms of defining what performance is. What are kind of some of the traits that you look for? And then talk to me about the practical compensation side of things. How do you incentivize it? How do you address it from a pay practice?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one for us here. I think we have a really kind of bespoke approach. And like what I'd say is that there's various things that go into your approach. Like obviously it's like your culture and kind of the demographic you're trying to attract, maybe the craft areas. But also so much of it is about your stage and even your industry, right? Like, are you like what level of kind of distraction, quote unquote, or admin are you willing to have your kind of managers or team members experience versus like reducing any of that and making decisions really easy. And so as someone who had worked on performance before, I had some point of views on like the kind of value of ratings or not ratings in terms of really, really incentivizing strong performance. And that's one that you can go back and forth on like forever. And I think I'm still like maybe one day we'll figure out like the perfect blend of best of any world. And but there's real trade-offs. And one of the things that I experienced with ratings, especially in performance before, is there's a lot of research shows that like there's like I think this research around like 50% of a rating is based on just the manager's bias, and we talk a lot about unconscious bias, and so very difficult to kind of reduce that without having time, right? That's why calibrations are quite lengthy, or processes and questioning that is quite lengthy to do to get a kind of bias-free scoring and grading, and then of course the admin side, the impact on employees. Sometimes I've been in places where you kind of do like a 5-point scale and then the middle feels really, really tough in a high performance environment, even though that's supposed to be good. And so wanted to really think about how do we reduce some of those pain points and ask ourselves the question, like, what's the DNA of what we're looking for in our employees, right? Looking for that like high performer, very self-motivated, comfort or even excitement with ambiguity, intrinsic motivation. If you've read Dan Pink's book Drive, it talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so those being the areas to focus on to incent performance, with kind of comp being strong enough that it's actually not a distraction. You're not worried about it. You're not wondering about it. You're not trying for it. You know that you already have that. There's trust. You're coming in a strong place with compensation and freed from worrying about that. So then these other pieces can really motivate you.
Yeah.
And so those were some of the premises of our thinking. And I don't know if you've read the Netflix book, No Rules Rules. It talks about kind of thinking around goals and also around compensation in a similar way. And that's where I think I got introduced to this kind of pay for talent approach. And so decided that that felt really like fit for purpose for what we were looking for.
Yeah.
With that type of talent profile, with that type of agility we wanted from people, and the type of motivation drivers we really wanted to focus on. And so we decided to go down this path of pay for talent. Like, we're going to comp you well. And so then that's where it was really helpful having the data. Before I joined Immutable, I think there was definitely like, especially part of employment brand, and then reality too, around like we pay you really well. We pay at like high percentiles, et cetera. Now we had the data to actually kind of do the financial analysis of what that looked like and what that and where we could land. And so we really made a strong effort and executed on having a high percentile, and one that we would be able to share with employees and deliver that kind of level of transparency. And so that's what really came together. And so as we decided we wouldn't do performance ratings, we're like, well, we still have a high performance culture. We want people to have what we think is really valuable at performance is those conversations with your manager, getting really clear. We're a big like radical candor company, getting really clear feedback, but that doesn't just exist in performance management. So we're going to invest in that being a part of the everyday. Performance is like kind of like that step back in time, and you look at it away from like the day-to-day hustle, like trends. Managers make really kind of quick instinctual decisions on if someone is on track or not. Then there's compensation reviews that are based on everyone who's on track has a kind of flat rate raise that we looked at the data around what is the average raise for high performers, what's the average raise rate, what's the average raise rate for high performers, so people who you're seeing in companies with like rating scales at the high end of the rating scale, right?
Yep.
And so if that's our expectation, everyone here is someone who would be at that kind of high end of the rating scale, then that's what our kind of flat rate raise is going to be.
Yeah, nice.
But that's where when the managers are making the decisions in our performance reviews of, on track, off track, would I strive to keep this person if they were to leave? That's kind of the way we word that. We're asking managers to make a tough call there too, and to kind of maintain that bar.
Yeah, I really love that. And I like in particular how, you talked about it being a nascent environment. Like, a lot of what you're doing hasn't been done before. And so I think you're probably asking people to make bets to deliver on, not necessarily deliver on them, but fail quickly, kind of, make the decision change. And I think you can't have pay be contingent on that. So it gives people like the safety and the freedom to be able to go, I'm going to do this thing that I think is going to have this result, but it's an experiment at the end of the day, even if it's worked for other companies, right? And so, I'm not personally at risk of it failing and it landing on my performance review and it impacting what pay I get. I know that part is secure because I'm trusted to be a high performer and I have to show up in other ways. But yeah,
Exactly.
I really love, that approach. How has that landed? Like, what's the sort of feedback been generally as now that you've implemented that?
Yeah, it's landed really well. But I think it's not just about having the system, it's about how you impart it and share it. I think there's so much that can be that there's going to be parts of compensation that are never going to land perfectly, or there's always going to be an appetite naturally for more. But I think when there's trust in like what the process is, how you're making decisions, why you're making those decisions, it takes away such a huge amount of kind of the challenge or turmoil or anxiety that people would have. And that was something we were really, really conscious about. So we went out there to share our approach to performance and compensation across the company. We started in town halls, then in kind of functions with managers specifically. Lots of kind of like AMA, Q&A time, anticipating FAQs as well, and some of the like curly, like kind of thorny ones as well. And we tried to bring people a little bit into like what the expertise is of compensation so they could put themselves in the like process. And that was probably why it was really great that I was relatively new to it, because I'd had to kind of be able to explain it to myself. So then it was like, great, now I can explain to other. It's like, explain something like you would to a 5-year-old type of thing.
Yeah.
And our employees are very, very intelligent here. So not at all like 5-year-olds necessarily, but we did that. And we talked about, hey, we start with the data. We look at some of these gold standard sources. Here are some other companies that use these resources and that are in there and that we compare ourselves to. Yeah. Based on that, we set a percentile. Here's what that means. If you take 100 companies, X number of companies would be below us in terms of our salary band. Yeah. We then base a band based on these 3 things, like your job family, which is a subset of your craft, your level, and your location. And then that creates this job band. And then it helped people kind of understand the process of and have trust in like, oh, okay, this is based on data from other places. Oh, okay, my friend at X place might make more, but maybe their percentile is higher than ours, and that makes sense.
Yes, I love that. It's kind of taking it outside of the black box and actually just showing people, look, let's demystify this. Let's help you understand the mechanics of how it's all determined. It doesn't need to be scary. It doesn't need to be this secret thing. I love that approach you're taking. And I think to your point around learning, like, you would no doubt know this with your background in teaching, but like the best way to learn a topic is to have to be able to teach it to someone else, right? Like it's probably, I think, the most impactful way to pick something up. But I love in particular, what for me is an absolute masterclass in terms of like how to roll something like this out is like, it has to be, multi-channel. It has to be, I think, what is it? You've got to say something 8 times before it, really starts to resonate with somebody. So, or before they actually start to absorb it. So I think that approach of like, FAQs, town halls, etc. Talk to me a little bit more about that sort of approach and I guess transparency in general, because I also love this term that you used when we caught up last time around, under the hood. Tell me a bit more about that.
Okay, I'm so glad you asked. I was just going to mention that. That's like one of my favorite things we've done. So not only did we do that when we launched it, but every time we have a comp review cycle, which is twice a year, we do our under the hood video, and now it's become kind of, it's like a thing. We have a slide deck, and we, get on to like the Slack hacky video recorder and do like 5-minute videos, because that's all Slack allows, which is great, because it keeps it concise. And a lot of the like, especially for the past few times, it's kind of the same thing, but it really helps, in the day-to-day, as we want by design. We don't want employees thinking about how do compensation decisions get made. But in this point in time where it's relevant for them, we want to provide the information that helps them make sense of it and feel comfortable about it, and hopefully feel really motivated by it. And we have a picture, a meme of like we thought it was a Toyota. We joked that it was a Toyota because it's us being scrappy, but it's actually like a Mercedes. But it's a meme where it opens and we're going through the hood. And then
I feel like you've gone from a Toyota to a Mercedes though now, with your like you're less scrappy. Yeah, I think that evolution, that's the proper evolutionary arc from my perspective.
I really do think we are like extremely mature for our size, for sure. But we do a few things. We share our comp principles. Like, we have principles. We share things like pay for talent. Here's what that means. Here's why and where that came from. We share the balances and trade-offs. So we'll say, like, we pay for talent. We pay at this high percentile. At the same time, financial sustainability is one of our principles, right? And so I'll talk on that one, and I'll say, so that means that, like, as a growing company, like, our salaries come from that pool that is a part of our, profitability as a growing company. And so we have to balance it with that. We talked about, I think one of our principles is also about like adaptability and flexibility. So it says like, hey, the things change in the market. That's reflected as well in our bandings in and of themselves. And things might change as we scale as a company and think about what's the right makeup of the company and the right types of percentiles for different roles and crafts, given the demand or scarcity that kind of exists for them. So it's a nice way to bring people into the considerations.
Yeah.
And that oftentimes there's, okay, this might not be my favorite, but I get that when you think about the entirety of a company, this decision's going to land. So we do that. And then the other piece that I think is really well received is we do what we call like just the market update. So we'll look at, like, Carta does really great analysis on like compensation and startups a couple times a year. And so we'll use that and any other resources that we get to kind of share how's compensation shifted in the market at large. How do we stand compared to that? What are we hearing in terms of trends? Is that changing anything for us or not? And so that's something that I think allows people to also see like the level of depth that and kind of thought and real analysis that goes into this and rigor, but also brings them into the conversation in an interesting intellectual way.
Yeah, it's you're so right, and I think absolutely the Mercedes is the more deserving car, because you're right. Like, for me, that's such a mature approach, and I think in particular your point around the fact that you not only speak to compensation, the principles, the practices, but you link it back to the company. I mean, it's so clear, I think, to me and hopefully to others as well, why your CHRO from Amex was saying that it's one of the the 3 areas that someone needs to sort of spend their time if they're going to go into it, because it is such a commercial thing. It's no doubt the biggest expense or the line item of your company, and so being able to link it to or to come down from your company results and speak to compensation and make sure that people get that full picture is so critical. I guess the follow-on question I sort of have from that is like, there's so much work that's gone into this, and I think that's another thing that sometimes people shy away from. But talk to me a little bit, and you touched on a little bit about it, but like, how much do you feel this has reduced just the pay as a distraction for your people, from kind of Toyota to Mercedes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely has and works in that way. Even if it is something that comes up again, we have something to point towards. So obviously we do the, under the hoods every comp cycle, but we also have a dedicated area on our Confluence that has all of that there in the same form and goes into each of our 6 principles in even more depth. And so there's something where, if someone needs a refresher, or if we need to explain something and want people to get to have a little bit more context, we have those ways to point people into that. And so I think that's something, it's actually been like taking a topic that can feel very hidden and a little bit scary to something that I feel like if people want to talk about comp, I really welcome it. And it's exciting to talk about it because there's so much that we're sharing there and willing to share there.
What about manager enablement? How have you found that approach, and do you feel that you've got that piece right? Because I think even in my experience, that's something that I've grappled with, is that you can be the most consultative as possible, with your comp practices and helping people understand them. But that link, and being able to democratize that through your leaders is really crucial to kind of, take the pressure away from the people team from having to constantly fill these queries. How do you feel that approach has gone at Immutable?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think part of it, and this is like, maybe it doesn't sound like I'm answering the question, but it is in an indirect way, I guess, which is that we wanted to reduce managers having to have a lot of queries and
Gotcha.
explanation to do. And I think that's where the simplification of the design is. It's not like explaining, hey, this different rating ascribes to this different percentage of increase, and let me kind of justify this rating to you now, et cetera. So that it takes away kind of that friction. And so I'd say that's like probably the biggest piece. But every time we do a perf review, just as we do the under the hood for everyone in the company on compensation, and that's the other piece of it too. It's like we're bringing everyone into it at the same time in terms of under the hood, because it's not a manager decision ultimately about what percentage. It's kind of a binary question for managers, right? And quite formulaic and designed to minimize kind of exceptions or outliers in that way. But we do, when we do performance cycles, every time we will also run, even though you've heard this 8 times, like you said, again, we'll talk about how this impacts compensation. Here are the questions, we really love to kind of keep track of what trends are. So we know, like, here are the common questions that come up. Let's practice again, like what those are. And those, we love to do a little bit of scenario in some of those sessions. And then again, with that, we have kind of the guidance online. Like we have a specific manager page and a manager guide for what we think is one of the most important pieces, which is the conversation at the end. Because like ultimately, all of this should drive to people, for the most part, doing really well, right? Getting that their raise, whatever cycle they're on, mid-year, end of year. And then it being an awesome conversation for a manager to have, to get to say, hey, guess what? Comp review's happening. I'm really excited to give you your new salary.
That's so good. So it's actually, it's helping take, I guess, the pressure off the people team, but also off managers, and just make it something that is like so well widely communicated and understood that there's not these distractions. I love in particular about, like, going back to your sort of pay design, like it seems like you've really taken the comp decisions out of the hands of the leaders, and they're not having to make, because it is such a formulaic approach, they're not having to make that kind of like, oh, exactly. I have a bucket of money, person A gets 2%, person 3 gets 3%, whatever it is. It really helps, I guess, keep the focus and the conversation around performance and how, around how to get from where I am to where I want to be, or where the company might want me to be.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Because even when you're on track, you're still growing, right? And so you don't have to decide if that's growing as a 4 or a 5. You're just, you're on track, you're doing an awesome job in your role, and like, here's what you can do next, or here's how you can shine even more type of thing. And I'll be really honest, like for some of our managers, we've hired a lot of experienced managers coming in who've been really used to having that bucket. And that's something that they've really valued and leveraged well, and have a lot of, maturity in being able to use well, including the difficult conversations that can come with that. And so we've taken, the approach to say, as a whole, like, we want to, even though maybe you're very capable of having that conversation, for some managers, that is going to be really difficult in a company that's moving as fast as we are. And so as a whole, we're going to do what we feel is simple, across kind of the average here.
Yeah. I love it.
And we've had that conversation live with managers as well. We're like, I miss being able to allocate. I'm like, I get it. But like, what if this person is really upset about that allocation? And they're like, yeah, that's hard.
It kind of takes the pressure off them as well. Like it really just makes them responsible for the performance stuff, and it's actually not even, it's great they get to communicate that pay outcome, but it's actually kind of largely out of their hands in a way. It's really been like, hey, we've been clearing up front that if you're meets expectations, you get this much. If you're a high performer, you get this much. Like, we've kind of front loaded that conversation, and people know what outcome's gonna look like.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine with all of this work, and a pay for performance model is polarizing at the best of times, but I was having this conversation with someone the other day around how, it's so critical that your compensation be an extension of your culture. And I love how, the way in which you've described that here. How have you felt that that's then landed, given what you had previously? Have you found that polarization has happened? Like, has it really made it, more compelling for the people that you wanted to keep, and less compelling for those that you are less aligned with? Tell me about that impact.
That's a really interesting question. I think, I feel like this is a natural evolution, probably what we had before, where maybe those values or philosophies weren't articulated, but I think this is all because of what I saw already being a like kind of stylistic preference and belief in people. So it's just more of a formalization of that.
Yeah. Like, what was it polarizing? Did you find that it made people kind of work out whether or not, Immutable was a place they wanted to stay, or if actually it was like it made it more motivating because it like more strongly correlated with the culture and reinforced that?
Yeah, I think more the latter. We've seen, so we measure kind of sentiments around this as well, like a lot of companies do in your kind of annual or biannual engagement survey. And everywhere I've been, I'm a real nerd about those sorts of scores, and those are the types of things that keep me up at night. I think they're really, really important every chance you have to kind of listen to people and have their sentiments. And, I've been in places where it's like, wow, like comp is really in the pits, but it's like, okay, it's always like, that's kind of like the standard comp is never going to be the top because we could always want more comp and whatnot. But I've been pretty blown away by the sentiments that we've had. Like there's definitely areas in engagement that are stronger and higher, but this is the highest I've seen results by far. We've had, the other thing I forgot to mention is leveraging comp consultants, by the way. Like really being able to, once you have your kind of philosophy and stuff in place, like help with banding, et cetera. And we had a comp consultant even step in and help us with like sense checks, some of our philosophy and trade-offs that would come with that. But I remember our comp consultant, like again, who we had in those early days, sharing like, wow, I've never seen results this high. And that was really great validation, and we constantly kind of monitor that, and it's, and even set goals to be higher and higher based on little pieces of feedback. So
that's awesome. So to be clear, so you're attributing like results and like engagement and performance and things like that, like improvements there, to the approach you've taken on compensation and I guess to some degree, the level of consultation and transparency you've brought with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's taken away like a major pain point and an area that often creates greater mistrust, and actually taken that and been an area that's built trust. And the fact that I think we're so willing to talk about it and answer tough questions and have that, we talk about sparring a lot at Immutable, and I think, this is a topic that is just as open for that. And, we've had questions before about like how we respond to like inflation, and, we've had to been like, look, that impacts companies too, and I'm going to head on tell you that, like, and, there's limits to what we can do, and here's why. If you go back to our principles, like financial sustainability, or there's times where, managers like, oh, our binary system means like, just to be clear, it is a binary system in terms of perf, but then there's like this kind of exceptional category for like those rare instances of something that really moves things forward in a deep, meaningful way, and that's rewarded as well. But some people are used to even more differentiation, right? And miss that. It's a big part of their personal toolkit as a manager. And so we've also been really intentional about being like, hey, this is one part of your rewards. Base salary is. We also have ESOP, and how do we think about that, and being very intentional about education around that, and that's actually what we offer for like that kind of highest category that you can achieve. And then we also talk about some of our other benefits we have.
Yeah, I love that. I love the comprehensiveness of it. It's it's always pleasing to see the degree to which a company goes into detail around these sorts of things. I think I want to pivot a little bit, and this is a bit of a curveball. So I think we've talked a lot about the great things that have happened and the good things and what's been successful. What are some of the learnings been, do you think? I mean, this is to some degree a kind of new experience for you as well. What are some of the things that you kind of went through and went, oh, I would have done that differently next time?
That is such a good question. If I can be like just a little bit personal, something for me is like, I love the creation mode. And once I create something, I can feel very attached to it. It's like a baby, And in some of the first sessions that we had, some of the questions that, were asked, like to no fault of anyone, but it, they felt challenging. Like they were kind of, hurting my baby, like questioning something, or you have those kind of one-off situations, like, you might be designing something, and you're like, at the most you can get 80% of people knowing what that other kind of 20% or 10%, whatever it is going to be challenged by is so important. And I'd add to that, which is like, I think I do tend to, and our team tends to anticipate what that might be at the 10%, but not to kind of take it personally or to overreact either way, which is be defensive or be like, we need to now change all of this. So I think I've had some times where I've been probably more kind of thrown by kind of targeted, kind of small pocket feedback or disappointment in wanting something to really, really be perfect for everyone in every way. And so I'd say that can be like a hurdle, right? Because you lose time on that and energy on that. So that is one thing for sure.
Any other prominent ones coming to mind? I see you searching the searching the memory
I
banks.
really am, and it's I feel like I'm like, am I not being reflective enough? Or
It's okay. Decisions you've reversed or anything, even through that consultative process, because you've been so consultative at it, anything you kind of put out there and went, okay, it's clear that my read on this was way off. I have to change course. Anything like that at all?
no like dramatic shifts. Like no, there haven't been really any 180s. I think we've been super considered, and I think just that whole piece of like seeing the trends that come from a wide swath of different people's perspectives helped you zero in on the things that are quite universal.
So true. So true. Being broadly consultative really mitigates the risk that you're going to put something out there. And I think if that, I mean, and look, this isn't even just a comp specific thing. This is a people, this is a kind of like development approach is, I think if you can just make sure that your requirements gathering is really buttoned up, and on something like comp, it has to be, every stakeholder group, then you're probably not likely to put a foot wrong. Like there is a solution there somewhere. It's not going to make everyone happy, but there's going to be a solution that meets most people's needs.
Yeah, and it's knowing, yeah, exactly, it is. And it's knowing like who are the people who's like being vocal champions is going to make the biggest difference, and how are you bringing them on board sooner and more frequently, etc. Because I've had that situation too, where like been in a room with like a kind of broader senior leadership team and a question about this, and having a member of exec be like, oh, I love our approach, I feel like it's made life so much simpler, like blah blah blah, and then you're like, yeah, like that's helping influence this and being that kind of change maker for us. So that's been great. I think the other piece too is like what can be challenging with comp is like, we talk about being strategically flexible as one of our kind of principles, and I think there are times where it's important to like remind myself and my team about that as well. But I think something I'd love for us to do even more ahead is like, it's one of those things we put on our like to-do list, and it gets, life happens, work happens, but it's kind of stepping back at some cadence to be like, hey, let's look back at and retro some of the exceptions that we've seen to our principles, and what's the pattern there, and what does that mean next in terms of like a reset or realignment. So I think looking back, that is coming back to that question, looking back, that is something that I wish I'd been more kind of planful around. And steadfast on doing, because our principle is to be strategically flexible, which means like we should be iterating on our principles as well and making sure that they're really fit for purpose. And if they're at a point where the ratio of exceptions is greater than not,
it's not working, right? And I love that point, right? Because it's so critical that your comp philosophy and your practices support your business, but it's not going to be perfect for, it might be perfect for what you're doing now, but it may not be perfect for what you're doing in a year or two's time. And I think that retro is so critical to knowing that it's, it's a guide, and it's, something to be adhered to, but it's not going to have the answer for every scenario. And there's going to be all these kind of like fringe cases, right? But I particularly love that it's like there will need to be exceptions made, and it will just need to evolve with you. I think it's such a hard thing for a head of people to do, is like know that you have to be the champion of this thing, but also know that it's not permanent, and it's not like, to your point, it's your baby, but you also have to recognize that it's got to evolve over time. And so it's like, how do you look at the data or the insights or use the retros to guide that?
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things where it can be this emotional topic, but how do you kind of create that like healthy distance as well, to remove kind of the unnecessary emotions from that for yourself even.
I love that. All right, I think probably like one last space I'm really eager to explore, and it's just like, it's down to the uniqueness of Immutable and some of the roles that you have. But I know when we first caught up, you talked about, crypto and blockchain and Web3. This whole space is very, very new. And so one of the most common things I get, certainly not even for, new kinds of skill sets like this, is where do we get benchmark data? What do we do when we just can't find benchmark data? I'd love for you to just talk me through the kind of approach that you took at Immutable and how you kind of landed on an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's like a few things you want out of benchmark data, I think, right? One, you want like a volume to just like validate the accuracy of that. And so therefore, like behemoths like your Radfords are really helpful for that, because there's a lot of companies that are in that. What you also want is, obviously, if you're basing it, like you want relevance to your company. So, for us, like we realize, okay, a lot of the companies in Radford we're going to, are larger than us, and or different industries than us that think about this differently. And so we also want to have a pool that is more kind of similar to our business profile. So needing to solve for those different pieces. And then obviously location, like we're quite geographically dispersed and open to being that. So knowing some of those things, we realize, oh, one data source does not actually answer all those questions, especially for some roles, right? It depends. Like there's roles like within engineering that have like really strong kind of standardized, well, uniform banding. Then there's roles that are like, this is never really like a tokens manager, or we have like a tokenomics role, and some of those were, don't know if even any source would fit that. But so like, I'd say 80% of roles, our main couple sources, we use Pave and Radford. Radford being like the behemoth, Pave being like the right size and industry and companies that are kind of pre-IPO. We can target by valuations that are similar to ours. It covers that. For the roles or like where there aren't existing job families in either of those sources, we have to get creative. We also so we'll simultaneously have our TA team helping us capture data from the market, and we
Love
have
that. They're hiring these people, right? They're a data source.
Yeah. And so we very intentionally like look for that and have a place to capture that and kind of compare what we're hearing across some of the sources. And then we get crafty about job families. And this is what I meant about phoning a friend and comp consultants. Like the good thing is like someone who really loves comp is really interested in these challenges to solve. And so, having that sense check of like, hey, like, okay, so this tokenomics piece, some of that like ties to this aspect of finance, that makes sense. Okay, some of it ties to this aspect of product, looking at these two different roles. Okay, could it be a combination of these craft areas? Great. And then, okay, let's apply the fact that we know this skill set and knowledge base is quite rare. So like, let's think about a healthy kind of premium to add to that. And so like this is what I love about comp now. I feel like I'm such a comp fangirl. It's like got that art and science, right? You're like, okay, in these cases, here's the formula that works. Use these sources, location, job family, level, boom, band. And then in these cases, you think, okay, how hard would it be to find this role, and how competitive is it out there for it? Great. How much does this role look differently in our company than in other places, and do we need to consider that?
Yeah.
And then kind of create bespoke banding as much as possible. We like to do that for families as a whole versus like one-offs.
Yeah.
But then every now and then there might be something that challenges us, and we go back to what we have crafted and revisit it.
Oh, I love it. I mean, all of that was just like the perfect playbook for kind of how to tackle this challenge. And it's it's not unique to crypto or Web3 type environments, right? It exists in a lot of different places.
It has nothing to do with crypto Web3. It's just like insert any random, job family or role or location. And how do you get resourceful in terms of the most, similar data set you can find?
Yeah.
And then take a risk and put it out there. Candidates give you that data by reacting to offers.
Yeah, precisely. Oh, so good. Amazing. Well, I mean, look, that's been an amazing conversation. I appreciate so much all of the insights. This time has absolutely flown by. For anyone that's out there that's kind of facing a similar challenge, they're kind of coming into this comp environment, not being familiar with it. What's your one tip? What's the one thing that, you wish that pre-Immutable Army would have known coming into this that would have just made it a little bit smoother for you?
Oh gosh, like I don't even know if this is a tip, but it's like a learning where it's so much more fun than I thought. I think if you're someone who likes solving kind of ambiguous problems and making, one of my favorite values from Canva was actually making the complex simple. And if you're someone who gets joy out of that, comp is such a great place to get to really practice and hone in on that. But my tip would be like phone a friend. I think that's kind of come through in kind of everything that we've gotten to share and I've gotten to reflect on. You don't have to do it alone. Most of the things you're solving, even if your company is smaller or at a different stage or different industry, it's the same thing. Everyone's trying to think about most of the same things, which is comp that's competitive, comp that's fair, comp that employees understand and feel kind of valued and recognized by, that managers can execute on.
Yeah.
It's
a universal language, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, amazing. Well, Ami, thank you so much. This has been genuinely like one of the most insightful conversations. So I really, really appreciate you jumping on. This is everything I could have hoped for. And hopefully it was enjoyable to rehash just what an experience you've gone through. So thank you.
No, thank you so much, Matt. I think these are awesome questions, and I just love the content that you have out there and are creating in this space, because I think it's a space that is so highly misunderstood actually. And so hopefully we can bring more awesome people into comp Because there's still problems to solve that, I'm still like, ooh, can someone help me figure this out, or what this looks like, or a way of landing that. So definitely want more folks to come join us in this.
Completely agree. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Foundation Series. Make sure to head over to our website to subscribe to the Foundation Series for monthly editions featuring future interviews on startup compensation. In each edition, we'll explore the different strategies, trends, and challenges faced by startups around the world. If you have a burning topic you'd like me to cover or a standout guest that you want to hear from, drop me an email so I can dive deeper into the compensation topics that matter most to you. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and practices driving success in global tech startups around the world. Thanks for listening.